And as soon as we get everybody on, Michael Zank wanted to say a few words of welcome, although he's not actually here yet.
Yeah, he's on his way.
He's on his way. And then, for the benefit of some people who haven't seen the archaeological details of what we're talking about, I have just a few slides to lead us up to the infant burial, and then John will talk a little bit about that, and then we'll have some general conversation.
Can you see me?
No. Hi.
It's David.
No.
Can you see me? Do you get a web camera?
Yeah.
It's nice to see you too. Thanks so much. We are, we as in Brian, are negotiating all of our technical issues. So.
If I wave, does somebody see me over
Well, Danny sees you if he's paying attention.
there? Oh, yeah, but he's distracted.
Right.
Where
and
is he sitting?
he's probably in the storerooms of the Apo Petticoat office.
It's very dusty in archaeology.
Yeah, there are a lot of boxes.
Don't see it. I'm John Beck. Nice to meet you.
And David Gurevich is from Jerusalem, but we still can't. David, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you see me right now?
No. It is. Do you?
Now
Oh,
we
there
can.
you are. Now we see you. Hi, David.
I'm gonna
All right. Hi.
this way.
This is great. And Jonathan Clowans just came in. Michael is here. We still need Sylvie and Cattell.
And they're joining us from here.
But Sylvie from Tel Aviv. And
I can see you.
Have you talked to Cattell yet?
It's John. He's on his iPad.
Oh, have you talked to Cattell yet?
Yeah.
Oh, good. Okay. She's doing okay.
Apparently.
Okay.
but we don't see her yet.
No,
She
I
hasn't.
don't see her.
She hasn't signed in yet. Okay.
No.
Who? Yeah, she.
Oh, no, she signed in. She just, the webcam's not working. Or the audio's not working.
Oh, so should we send her a message?
Try on an iPad.
I have been, we've been emailing. Just trying to
Yeah.
figure it out.
What's the best Wi-Fi here to use?
The Neo one.
One. Go to your option.
Can you hear me?
Oh,
Yes.
Sylvie, is that you?
No, that's not good.
No, that's Cattell.
Cattell, we can hear you, but we can't see you. Do you have a little
I
camera?
have to wait. Maybe I have to activate the camera.
Yeah, you need to find your camera icon. Cattell.
Here I am.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi, Cattell.
Hi.
Bonjour.
Hello, hello.
Let's see. Sylvie, what about Sylvie? Where is she? And Paul Cartman. Oh, I see Paul.
Yes. Can you see me?
Where's Paul?
I mean, I see his name on the list, but Paul, we can't see you. Can you hear us?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. You need to find your little camera icon and click it.
There he
Is
is.
that working?
Hello, audio, are we?
Woohoo!
Hey!
Now we lost somebody else. We lost somebody else.
We lost.
Hi, Paul. Hi, Danny. How are you?
There's Cattell.
Very well.
Okay, so now, okay. Oh, there's David. Okay.
David, yeah,
Let's see.
that's
So now we need Sylvie. Where's she?
I haven't gotten any emails from her yet.
It looks like Cattell's got her device did well.
Yes.
Oriented well for us, but I wonder if it compromises the PowerPoint
Wow.
slides.
I don't know. Guess we'll find out.
Here
Oh,
we go.
wow.
Oh my goodness. That
Oh,
is so nice.
Well, I wanted to wait until we got everybody connected.
Yeah.
this is awesome. All right. So the last person. So we are waiting on Sylvie, but since he knows at least the initial beginnings of the first part of the presentation, maybe we can get going. So Danny and Cattell and Paul and David, some of you know, but to let me officially introduce Michael Zank, who is sitting here on my left and would like to say a few words.
That's right. So, bienvenue et
Bochim Hadim Tzaim Be'eretz Israel. And all of us over here, thank you for joining us for the first of what I hope will be several international conferences in form of a virtual brown bag. So I would like to welcome you as the director of the Elie Wiesel Center for Jewish Studies here at Boston University. We are very, very proud to host this Maccabees project here and gladly recognize our co-sponsors and colleagues from Boston College, Yonda Gillian, and everybody else who is here this morning. And also our colleague from the archaeology department who will document everything. And we are also gratefully acknowledging the help of the Boston Center for the Humanities and EC Center for the Humanities.
Institute of
Institute Liberal Arts. And the support of the archaeology department to make this project possible. And I would like to extend a particular thank you to Sarah Leventer, who sits in the corner. You can't see her, but she may come and take a bow, because Sarah has been doing all the logistics, and she's amazing. And so I just want to say that this project is not just based on a very interesting subject that fascinates all of us and has, unfortunately, a lot of relevance today. The armed saints of the Maccabees are very much in vogue in many places and many ways. But it is also a project that is interested in the methodology, in the lacunae of knowledge that we live with when we are only working within one particular discipline. And it is extremely heartening to me to see us getting together across disciplines and to learn text scholars, learning from archaeologists, learning from historians about what we really know about the Maccabees and that age that is so decisive in shaping our perception of Judaism and also early Christianity. So I want to say that Andrea Berlin's project is extremely interesting to me, not just because she's an archaeologist and I know nothing about archaeology, but because she's here venturing into something slightly different, which is an archaeology of knowledge. And she's assembled this wonderful group of people internationally with the same meticulous care you would bring to an archaeological excavation. So I'm very grateful for that, and hope and wish this whole group a lot of success.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you so much. Before I just start to chat, where did Brian go?
He just popped downstairs for a minute.
Because we lost David.
Yes.
And I don't know.
The camera may have dropped out, his audio may have dropped out. Let me check with him.
Okay, thank you. That would be great. So for people here in Boston, and then for all of you guys, I want to just quickly acquaint you with the archaeological reality, and then turn it over to John to talk about some information that he can give us about the skeleton, and then we'll just open this up to discussion. So you're looking on your screen, I hope, at this nice aerial view of Kedesh. This was taken a long time ago before we started our excavations. Yeah, here we go. And and we're talking about Kedesh for two reasons. One, because according to most understandings of, oh good, there's David. Hi, David. Because according to most understandings of the territorial boundaries of the Maccabees, at least at their greatest extent, Kedesh was part of their domain. And our excavations have possibly called that into question. So on the right-hand side of the screen, you see the aerial view of the mound, almost a kilometer from north to south, and at the far southern end, you see the 20,000 square foot administrative building that we excavated. And here a closer look at it. So this is this imperial administrative building constructed sometime around 500 BCE, occupied under three successive imperial regimes, the Achaemenids, the Ptolemies and the Seleucids. The footprint stays the same, but some of the internal aspects of it differ. And one of the things that it differs in is in this, I don't know if you can see me moving the cursor around, but up here in the northwest corner of the building is where we're going to be focusing. So when we started excavating, we saw right away that the site had been abandoned in a hurry, and whole rooms filled with whole objects were both inside the building and in some places outside the building. Here you're looking at a room of some small establishment that was immediately outside the building, and all of the vessels and objects in the lower right came from this one tiny little area of this room. In fact, you see the juglets sitting inside one of those stone troughs. And so we knew right away when we started to excavate that the building had been, the site had been abandoned. And when we started excavating the large building, we realized that the Imperial Administrative Building had also been abandoned very abruptly, and all of these useful goods and objects and vessels were found lying on the floor. So you're looking here at the storeroom, and it's right next to the archive room that we'll be getting to in just a minute, and it was lined with these storage jars. It's a white plaster floor, and I only make that comment to say that this room wasn't burned. And that's part of the argument for the intentionality of what we're about to see, which is that the building was abandoned and the site was abandoned, but it wasn't destroyed, it wasn't damaged, and there's no evidence except in the archive room for any deliberate destruction. So the text that we are that got our attention when we discovered this was this section from 1 Maccabees, chapter 11. Not only for the specific mention of Kedesh, but for the timing, because the event that it describes takes place in the exact decade that we were able to determine our building had been abandoned. In that decade, which is the 140s BC, Jonathan heard that the generals of Demetrius came to Kedesh. He went to meet them in the plain of Hatzor, which we assume is someplace in the Hula Valley, which you see off in this part of the screen. There was an ambush, and Jonathan's men fled, but in short order, Jonathan's men came back, and he turned them to battle. They chased the enemy, according to 1 Maccabees, to their camp at Kedesh, took over the camp, killed a lot of troops, and returned to Jerusalem. That would appear to give us a historical circumstance for the abrupt abandonment of the building, and the timing is perfect. So now we're back to the building and looking up in this complex in the northwest corner. It's a 3-room complex. Doorways connect these rooms, and then from the southernmost one of these rooms, this one here, you could enter into other parts of the building. But access to the corner room, this room up in the northwest corner, is only from a doorway to the room to the south, and then a doorway from another room to the south. That's the only way to get up into that part of the complex. So it was very deliberately protected, that room. And when we excavated in the room, we found in one corner evidence that the room had been in use in its final phase as an archive. So in this corner, we found over 2,000 clay boli, which the fire that we know eventually burned the room. But it burned the papyrus, so we can't say exactly what sort of archive it was, but we can say from the range of boli, from the range of ceilings, that it was both an imperial archive and a local archive. So all manner of documents must have been stored in there, as we can tell from the fact that there are both imperial Seleucid ceilings as well as ceilings of private individuals, such as this, the man in the middle row and the lady smack in the middle. These can't be official ceilings, or the Zeus and the Ganymede that's in the top row, second from the left. So there's this combination of civic, imperial, and private ceilings in the archive room. Right next to where all the bullae were, we found this cache of oil flasks, none of which are burned. And the oil flasks, we know from residue analysis, originally held cedar oil, which is a preservative for papyrus. So we suppose that the flasks were part of the toolkit for those who were maintaining the archive. When we excavated the archive room, and now you're looking south, you see the single doorway that allows access to the room. When we were excavating it, it didn't look like that. The doorway wasn't clear. Instead, the doorway was blocked. And it was blocked in a very strange way. I've gotten into trouble from Donald Ariel for calling this symbolic. Donald immediately objected to that when I used that term in the lecture I gave at Tel Aviv last year. He said, I don't know what you would mean by a symbolic blocking. And I'm not sure what I mean either, except that it's not a functional blocking. As you can readily see, you could have quite easily stepped over it. It continues the line of the wall, but it doesn't actually block the doorway, so it's very peculiar. And it's purposeful. So it's purposeful and peculiar, and after that, anything else is a judgment call. So I'll leave it there. Inside the room, the mud brick had been burned so hard that it was petrified and very, very difficult to excavate. Even if you swung a hard pickaxe at it, you just got a lot of dust often. And embedded in that petrified mud brick were roofing nails, which must have been part of the wooden beams that held up the ceiling of the room. And when the beams burned, when the room was set on fire, they fell in and became embedded in the mud brick, which was part of the superstructure of the walls. The walls themselves are the archive room, but no other rooms. Oh, there's Sylvie. Hi, Sylvie. But of no other rooms were the interior stones were cracked from the heat of the fire. And you can see very clearly in this detail, which is the wall that separates the storeroom from the archive room, that the stones only on the right side, the archive room side, are cracked. But the stones on the left-hand side, the storeroom side, are not, emphasizing again the particularness of what happens in the archive room, how it's something quite different than what happens anyplace else in the building. And up against the back wall, just above the floor level, but below the petrified mud brick, buried by it, was this infant burial set up right against the wall with a semicircle of stones around it. And that is my cue to turn things over to John Bethard. So for those of you that came in on this call before, after we introduced everybody, John, wave so that everybody sees you. Here's John Bethard, who teaches here in the medical school and also the Department of Archaeology. And he's going to talk to us a little bit about infant burials. So, John, take it away.
Thanks, Andrea. Before I get started, I want to preface this by saying my region of archaeological interest, the closest I get is the Carpathian Basin of Transylvania, and then all of my other field work is in the New World in South America. So this is a whole new line of questions, and it's been fun to think about with Andrea. So I wanted to just quickly point out a couple of things as a bioarchaeologist who has only seen a photograph of this burial. And Andrea and I have been talking about this, and one of the things that we've been discussing involves the position of this infant, what its positioning might mean, and whether or not there are elements of this infant's skeleton that are present or not. And when you can look at the skeleton, you obviously see that there's no head, and it doesn't look like that there are any hands or feet. And so the question becomes, where are those bones, and were they removed, or perhaps could they be some could there be some issue related to the preservation of those skeletal remains that we just don't have them because they're no longer there. So one of the things I want everybody to look at is just at the position of the skeleton right now, and you can see for those in Boston, you can see the top part here. I've got a pointer. I apologize if for those abroad. Andrea's putting the arrow right now. We're looking at the arm elements here. And then down here, we're looking at the legs, and that speck here is one of the hip bones. And so, and what we can also tell from those surfaces is that those are the front side or the anterior aspects of the bone. So this is clearly an individual that was buried on its back, and that it was laid down in basically an extended position, which is going to be an interesting comparison that we make in just a moment. One of the other questions that we could ask, and in the Dropbox folder, some of the work from the Tophet and Carthage and some of the other contexts have really debated the age of infant skeletons and whether or not the age is indicative of a sacrifice event. So how old was this individual, and how that plays into its interpretation is a quite important question, as is my last bullet point here, this issue of post-birth survivorship. One of the things we can tell from looking at skeletal remains, and particularly teeth, is whether or not an individual survived. And this has to do with the way in which our teeth form during gestation and then after gestation. And so what I have included here in the slides is just a picture of what is referenced in some of the literature on something in a tooth called a neonatal line. And a neonatal line is this structure in your enamel that we can look at here, where that white arrow is pointing on the right, and this dark line here, the white arrow is the easiest to see that it's pointing. So what you're looking at is a cross-section of a tooth. And basically this is a baby who survived birth, because what we can see is the presence of that neonatal line. What happens is that your enamel is developing while you're a fetus. You're born, that process stops because the process of birth is very, very stressful. Then it initiates again. So you have this record that is recorded in the teeth. So one of the issues that people might be looking at when they're trying to look at a sacrifice event that happened around the time of birth is the presence or absence of that data. Now, I don't think we've got any teeth in this instance, but certainly in some of the other debates from the Tophet and Carthage, that's been a line of evidence that people have used to argue for or against that hypothesis. In terms of what we would look at in other infant skeletons, just to give us a sense of how paper thin and how tiny these bones are, what you're looking at here is an infant from a 17th century burial from a Reformation area church in Transylvania that I was not part of the excavation of, but that I have been involved with the analysis of. And what we can see is A, just how small this burial is in general, and then B, how in the hand, this is a really interesting case because there's a coin in the right hand of this individual, right around these very tiny baby hand bones. And so we can see just how small those are, as well as the elements from this individual's cranium that are, the elements of fetal bones of the cranium are paper thin, so it doesn't take much to make those bones go away. So when we look at this individual from the site here, we can't necessarily say that the lack of those bones is because the head was removed. That we might just have an artifact of preservation, just like the very tiny hand bones. We're talking about elements that are the size of a piece of rice, so those hand elements are quite tiny as well. But what is interesting here between the burial from 17th century Transylvania and Andrea's example is that I'd like you to just look at some of the positioning so that the arms and the legs are sort of splayed out in the same kind of way. This burial is obviously very intentional in that it's placed along with lots of other infant burials under the floor of the church. And so the positioning here is one clue that in our context we're using to talk something about intentionality that is unrelated to sacrifices of infants. And then, so just to sort of springboard from that, one of my last points that I want to make, second to last points I want to make, is the way in which bioarchaeologists are now looking at infant skeletons to say something about mom. So when we look at really young infants, we can see here various infant bones, again from this site from the infant that you just saw, and these bones are quite porous. They look like they've got pinprick lesions all over them. What we see on these elements are signs of physiological stress. And so an interesting angle besides the infant itself is what we might be able to say about the mother and the process of pregnancy, gestation, or any kind of physiological stress episodes that might have been encountered during the event. So not only if you're looking at a question of infant sacrifice, is there something on that infant's skeleton that might allow us to say something about the environment that mom was in and her experience leading up to the birth of the child. And then just lastly, very quickly, I find this a really interesting discussion in general because it sort of adds very broadly to a whole area of people in my specialty, bioarchaeology, that are really honing in on children and infants to ask a host of questions about mortality, infant mortuary practices, as we're discussing personhood and identity, weaning events, abuse, in examples of child abuse and the archaeological record, and this last aspect of maternal health. So it's interesting how this case is adding broadly to some literature that's just coming out. And so I've been really delighted to talk with Andrea about it, and I'm interested to learn what people say about this particular context. So thanks for your inviting me.
So let me put the slide back up of our burial and ask you guys to, let's start talking. Oops.
Well, baby.
Yeah,
it doesn't like to see it does not want to see the skeleton.
Can you all hear? Raise your hand if you can hear us.
Uh-oh.
Can you hear us? Danny, can you hear us? Sylvie? Oh, okay, good.
Great.
There's a delay.
So, if you looked at any of the readings, you see that one of the big things right now is about whether such a thing as sacrifice is the right word to use, whether these are actually simply burials as opposed to sacrifice.
So I have a question about the purity implications of a skeleton like this. Would within a Jewish context, it seems kind of unlikely to have a burial in such proximity to manuscripts and to daily work. because of purity concerns. But I'm reminded of the proximity of the cemetery near Qumran to a site that was Jewish, whether sectarian or not. So is it impossible to imagine this as a Jewish administrative room because of purity concerns? And did Greeks and Romans have similar, impurity associations with corpses?
Got a question for me? So I want to back up and know more. I mean, have the bones been carbon dated? Are we certain about the dating context of this burial?
We're certain about the dating context of the burial. We're certain that the burial cannot be, it has to be between 144 BC, which is the latest, or the earliest possible date of the amphoras that are found in the room, the imported Rhodian amphoras, and sometime in the 130s, when the site as a whole, or part of the building is really occupied. And this room had to have been burned by that. There's stratigraphic that it was already cut off. So it's within about a 10-year period during which the only attested historical episode is this event between Jonathan and the Seleucids at Kedesh.
And we're certain that the archive was also used precisely during that same decade?
Yes, we are, because we have dated ceilings.
From We don't know who managed the archive.
We do not know who managed the archive, and in fact, I think, there is this sense that we could fall into some kind of circular discussion where we say the presence of this infant burial means that it couldn't be so-and-so or it must be so-and-so. But the problem is that we have a lot of possibilities of people who were in this room at this. So there would have been the Seleucid army. There would have been possibly Seleucid imperial officials. There would have been provincial administrators. There would have been locals. For example, people who lived at the site but were servants or slaves. And there are the Maccabees who may or may not have been there. This may or may not be an historically just a valid attestation. So we're precise on the time, but we have a lot of candidates for the actors.
There's no purity concerns for a non-Jewish burial, so necessarily. That is good. You're nothing that would preclude, because you're assuming that, if it is a non-Jewish burial, they wouldn't have purity concerns. They wouldn't know, and Jews who come later, the burial might not know it's there.
Well, so an initial question is, can it be a burial, considering its location and considering its circumstances?
Can you also speak up a little bit? The speaker is that black thing right in the middle of the table, so if the farther away you are from it, it can be tough to hear.
Tal or Paul or Sylvie or David or Danny, have you been able to hear us?
Yes.
Well,
I have a little problem hearing the speakers right now.
Okay.
Andrea, I can hear you well, but I could not really hear very well the people next to you.
So Jonathan was saying that at this point in time, purity is not really a concern for, I mean, purity concerns and burials are not really a problem, and it's especially not a problem if it's not Jewish.
That's what I focused on if we're not certain this is a Jewish burial, it's difficult to figure out what the purity concerns would be for Jews. They might not know that there's anyone buried here, and it's difficult to know at that period of time whether they would have considered a non-Jewish infant burial to be something to be looking out for. We have evidence of that in rabbinic literature, but that's much later.
But then my question is burial really the right word to use? Could this possibly be a burial?
If not a burial, then what? A sacrifice?
A sacrifice.
Or what about a reburial? Do we have that practice where you've got excavation of bones from which the decomposed material is removed, and then a repositioning somewhere else?
You know, just based on my look at that, again, I only am going on the photograph, that looks like a primary inhumation to me based on the anatomical positioning of the elements, and there's nothing that seems not correct about where those bones should be. Sometimes when we see those secondary deposits, the arm bones are swapped on the opposite side, or the leg bone is switched upside down, and those, just based on the photograph alone, it looks like an in situ primary inhumation of some variety.
Can we step back? Why does anyone think this is a sacrifice? Because I don't. Normally you think a sacrifice in a place where there's an altar, and a place where there's some sort of, not by an archive. We don't think of libraries as locations of child sacrifice. So I have, forget purity. I have no idea why anyone thinks this is a sacrifice unless I'm missing something.
Can I ask?
I do not think.
Hear me?
So Paul, were you starting to say something, Paul?
Yes. So I'm not sure about the terminology of sacrifice versus burial, but it does seem quite plausible to connect it to the violent ending of this archive in some way. In that presumably there wouldn't have been a baby buried or sacrificed into a working archive, and the archive seems to be destroyed at this violent crisis moment for the Kedesh Center, and so I'm not sure if we can sort of frame it rather than as an isolated burial, but as part of a sort of whole complex of violent acts which are symbolically but also physically ending this archive space. And in that sense, I think it might be worth bringing in some of the other archives which are violently destroyed at a very similar time within the Seleucid Empire.
Oh, like what? So
in Seleucia on the Tigris, the sort of major Seleucid city of Mesopotamia, there's an archive known as Archive B, which seems either a sort of private public archive or a mostly private one. And that seems to be destroyed. The last dated bullae come from the reign of Demetrius II. And that archive is burnt in the 140s. People have identified it with the arrival of the Parthians. But what is really unusual, what is really unusual about this burning is that in addition to sort of destroying the documents and surely sort of all the debt records which are kept there, they also gouged out the Seleucid era numbers from a number of the clay bullae which were binding these documents before they burnt it. That is an unnecessary act of violence if you just want to destroy the records. But I think that it might have something to do with what the archive represents, which is a particular temporal regime, and that what you have there and what you have here is an act of closure, of of an imperial linear time system. And I know that's sort of far out and crazy, but I would be tempted to place this dead baby in that context.
So that would mean a murder and not a sacrifice, actually.
Exactly. Or some kind of exorcism of an imperial regime.
It looks like the kind of could it be analogous? Could it be analogous to the kind of ritual violence that marks the end of the priest regime in Josiah's reforms, and then we also get the king of Edom burning the bones of others in Amos. You know, burning or kind of a public desecration of a body.
Right.
Looks like a good way to mark the end of something that you've quashed. But this is a baby, so I wonder how that figures.
I mean, the obvious.
Sorry. I just wanted to add that it's not really a question between a burial or a sacrifice. Of course, it is a burial. You can see the body is buried. You can see the stones aligning the grave. The question should be, how did it come to die, not whether or not it's a burial.
So if it's possible to add, as far as I remember from Carthage, at least in Carthage, the burials in Tophet were all in special vessels, and bones were burnt, and there were also inscriptions that were dedicating the burial to a god or goddess, Tanit, and so on. As far as I see, and I'm not sure that I heard everything because of the technical malfunctions, there is nothing of such kind findings here, right?
That's correct. Actually, that's correct. When I was rereading Larry Steger's Rites of Spring and the Carthaginian Tophet this morning, I was making note of those exact same dissimilarities, that in the Tophet there are pyres, there are urns, there are stelae, there are dedicatory or votive inscriptions that these sacrificed infants are in promise of a vow that was addressed, and then it is the recipients giving over of something as their part of the deal, as it were. And there were also animal bones. So there's a whole array that, right? And you are correct, we don't have any of those things here.
Which is why I ask why anyone thinks this is a sacrifice. We don't have, this is a burial, clearly, but children died. So,
because of the context, because of the peculiarity of it being inside a specific room of an administrative building. But it's the only thing.
Administrative archives aren't a known location for child sacrifice. But they're not really a known location for sacrifice.
Correct.
Right?
Well,
so normally it would seem to me that we make contextual decisions based on not simply peculiarity, right? But rather the hypothesis ought to be built on a specific suggestion of the context. As far as I am aware, we are lacking all indications of sacrifice other than death, right?
No, I don't. I think that isn't true, because there is the very purposeful. This goes back to what Paul was saying. There is, in addition to the burial, the very deliberate, particular, and purposeful and comprehensive destruction of the archive room, and only the archive room. That is, that the context is not, oh, there happens to be a burial and there happens to be a building and the room in which the burial occurs happens to be the archive. Actually, I would see a single constellation. This context is all one thing, and the ultimate destruction of the archive room is the final piece of the event that the burial is part of.
And that would suggest a violent death, perhaps, for this child. But violence, I mean, right? If the archive is destroyed, a child absorbed into that destruction, we would normally explain that as a violent death. And I'm still not, I don't yet have, I haven't heard anything yet here, and there may be more that I haven't heard, of why we're thinking about sacrifice as a possible. There's no altar, there's no votives, there's no sense that this is a place of particular religious significance. There's no association between libraries and locations of religious significance, at least certainly not in the Jewish tradition at this time. But an administrative archive might be located near a temple, but usually we say they're located near temples because we find the altars and the temples nearby. So I don't.
Well,
I mean, deliberate death, violent death, all of these things, but those aren't ingredients of sacrificial death necessarily. I mean, those are co-indicators. They're indicators of other kinds of intentional death.
so, I mean, it's possible that the word sacrifice is a little bit of a red herring, but to go back to Paul's point about a violent closure and a sense of severing one mode of timekeeping and record keeping. For this, there are parallels. Paul, you want to go back to that?
Sure. I mean, I'm actually very, very struck by parallel things which are going on in the 140s in the immediate vicinity. So the first would be the rebel king of the Seleucid Empire, Diodotus Tryphon, who supports the young child son of Alexander I Balas, a late Seleucid king from 143. He murders him in 141. And the Seleucid Empire, until that moment, from 311 to 141, had been using a time system which is linear, had never restarted. It had reached an extremely high number for ancient states at the moment. In 141, Diodotus Tryphon abolishes the Seleucid era, and he establishes a year one for himself. And I think this is more than a sort of a meaningless act. I think we can see that he is sort of weaponizing time in that at the site of Dora, Tel Dor, just on the coast, which was one of Diodotus's bases, when he was besieged by the legitimate Seleucid king Antiochus VII, he fired lead slingshots at the enemy. These lead slingshots had his year system on them. They have year 4 or year 5. Mm-hmm. So it's literally firing his own regional count, his restarting, his closure and restarting of the times. And the other system which is going on at precisely the same time is, according to First Maccabees, High Priest Simon Maccabee introduces year 1 of his own count for documents within Judea. So you have these two moments of sort of closure of the Seleucid time system, a Seleucid time system which is strongly associated with documents and is on, as we know from Kedesh and from Babylonia, it's on seal rings. It's, I think, annually distributed to the officials of the kingdom as seal rings. We have these 3 moments of closure in a very small geographic area.
Perhaps we could add the relocation, apparently in Jerusalem, of most of the administrative activity from Ramat Rachel to the temple, according to Oded Lipschitz, working and dating of the stamps, the handle stamps in Jerusalem. That would happen also more or less in the same time.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. It happens around, I think that Oded and David Vanderhooft, who couldn't be with us today because he's in Germany, have that transfer happening around the middle or so of the 2nd century BC. So more or less at that time. David, do you know more about that?
Excuse me, I didn't hear the question.
I asked if you had any more information about Sylvie's question about the transfer of administrative control under the Hasmoneans from Ramat Rachel to Jerusalem mid-2nd century or so.
I'm not really familiar with the specific topic of Ramat Rachel. Jerusalem was a big problem for the Hasmoneans before they managed to conquer the Hakra. And there is, of course, a very big debate, and the debate is still ongoing because we do not have a lot of findings from the Hellenistic period in Jerusalem. And by the way, next week there is an interesting conference in Jerusalem where Doron Ben-Ami and Yana Chekhanovitz are going to expose some of their findings from the Hellenistic period that might be connected to the Hakra. So maybe next week we'll know a bit more about how Jerusalem looked at that time and what was going on there. So that's a big question. Getting back to the site, I would like to raise 2 points if I already got the floor. So one point, with your permission, is about infant burial, totally from a different period. There is an infant burial in a jar inside a house that was discovered recently by Shai Bar. It dates back to the Chalcolithic period. So it is also found inside a house, and it's interesting to see whether there are similarities in articulation of the bones and so on. The second point, and I'm not familiar with the stratigraphy of the site, is maybe this specific house has 2 layers of occupancy. So the first layer was the archive, and then after it went out of use or was cankered or destroyed, there was a temporal residency there, and the burial, also the blocking of the entrance of the doorway, belonged to that second layer, which is more later.
No, it can't be, David. It can't be. The stratigraphy and reuse of the site make it clear that the blocking of the doorway and the burial are buried by the petrified mud brick that completely seals them, and above that is topsoil. There's never any reoccupation there. And by the way, just to confuse it even more, the oil flasks, remember I said the oil flasks aren't burned?
Yes.
So either they were empty if we believe, I really want to hear what Cattell thinks about this, the historicity of this attack, but I will say, if we believe that there really was a Maccabean attack at Kedesh, then these vessels were filled with oil at the time and tipped over when they were running around wreaking havoc at the site, then they cannot have been the ones to effect this burial, or set the room on fire and effect this burial, because the vessels would have, these little flasks with oil would have burned up. If they were filled with oil and the room was set on fire, the flasks would have turned into, little bombs. Yeah, they would have exploded, but they don't. They're not even burned. So either they were empty, or, which seems unlikely that you would keep 40 flasks that are empty in the room, or there are multiple phases, but they are not multiple phases of occupation. There just has to have been some time that elapsed. Cattell, would you talk a little bit about what you think about this text from the point of view of somebody who's studied this book a lot?
Well, having heard what Paul said, I'm just wondering whether there is any connection at all between the Maccabees and the closure of the archives and the death of this infant, which seems to be violent, but not necessarily a sacrifice, as you said.
Mhm.
And I'm just wondering, because if we are, let's say, between 143, 141, it is the period of Simon, not Jonathan, and it may be completely unconnected. You see what I mean? I mean, we don't know exactly what Jonathan did. We have only this literary evidence that he went to Kedesh, but we don't know what exactly happened. What is a big trouble, in my view, is the fact that there is little destruction on the site.
Right.
I would imagine an attack by Jonathan's troops to be much more devastating than, this very specific closure of the library, of the archive that you emphasized.
Sylvie?
Yeah. Pursuing on Catel's remark, and I also want to elaborate on the Akka, which David mentioned earlier. In First Maccabees, we have several descriptions of the Maccabees conquering a place and purifying it in order to make it kosher for settlement. So what we could have here, based on what Catel say, that there is not a huge amount of destruction in the archive, could be exactly the reverse process. Instead of, because it was impossible to utterly destroy the site, because, I don't know, people who destroyed it didn't have the manpower to do it, so they defined it to make it improper to settlement and to administrative activity. So I don't know whether that would work.
That's a very interesting idea. And so the possibility then is that it's not provincial administrators rising up against the Seleucid regime or locals, which might be something like what happened at Seleucia on the Tigris, but rather the Hasmonean soldiers.
No. I don't think that my surmise says anything about the identity of who did it. I don't think that the Hasmoneans were the only ones to be sensitive to purity and to the need to purify the site before settling it. I think that was a common notion in the whole region. So defining the site could be done by anyone who would be interested in closing it, as you say, but who wouldn't have the manpower to destroy the site, so would go for a more symbolic act of destruction or defilement.
Can I ask a question? Yeah. One of the things that I've been wondering about is the age of this individual, which we don't necessarily know right now. But the question is, if this was an infant that was a stillborn, so let's imagine that it was just, a non-live birth, where were those burials? And would you imagine a scenario where if this was a baby that was never alive, could that be in the room? So there's no chance this could be you wouldn't put your stillborn in the archive.
No, so I mean, it was interesting when David brought up that Chalcolithic burial, and in the Middle Bronze Age as well. It's very common, actually, to keep everybody real close, bury inside a house and under house floors. But there are periods when it happens, and there are periods when it doesn't. And just to say, this is a period when it doesn't. I mean, Danny, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think we have any examples of in the Second Temple period of burials, not only inside houses but even inside settlements.
Not that I know of, no.
It looks to me like kind of a conspicuous place to keep a body. And I wonder, are we sure that the wall, that the stones here are, do we know whether there's a wall that goes all the way up?
Yes. This is the north wall of the building.
So this was buried inside a double wall?
No.
On the left. The stones on the
He's
left.
looking at the left side.
Okay, so it's not buried between two walls. It's buried on a stone table.
It's not buried on a stone table. It's it's on dirt. It's just a little bit of I see what you're saying. Yeah, it does look like that. That's the foundation course of the wall. But, this is this little semicircle that juts out from the wall. It's not itself on a layer of stone. It's on dirt.
Right, so it's inside those, the stones that have been arranged around it. It's inside.
That's
It's
the
inside
foundation.
those.
This is the foundation course.
Yeah.
So, would it have been viewed, at the time of its arrangement, would it have been conspicuously present for anybody who came to see it?
Well, it doesn't look like, it looks like the room was set on fire right away. It's hard, I guess I can't prove that. But certainly the very next thing that happens is that the whole room is filled in with this petrified mud brick, which was the superstructure of the walls, that when the roof beams caught on fire, they came down, the walls came in.
I'm just thinking that a defilement, or a corpse that's intended to be apotropaic, wouldn't necessarily have that function if it's under dirt. But if you could see it sitting there,
oh, I see.
then,
yeah, that's interesting.
Then you'd know that this is a defiled room. And so I wonder, would it have been viewed by anybody who came in, or would it have been hidden underground?
Paul, yeah.
This is just a question. Do we know sort of where the body is in relation to how the archive was actually used when it was in operation? Is it against, say, near where the bullae were found? Is it against where sort of things were stored? Do we know how that room worked, and if that is a deliberately selected location within the room?
Yeah, that is a very interesting question. You can see from this view that I've now got on the screen that it's lined up with the doorway, which is actually something that I've never thought about until this moment. It's lined up with the doorway, which is not the middle of the room. The doorway is not in the middle of that wall. It's a little off center. To the right on this screen, the eastern part of the room, I don't know if my cursor will work here. So in this part of the room, can you see my cursor moving back and forth? Along this wall. So the storeroom is over here, is on the far side, in this way. We're looking north. And the bullae and the oil flasks are all here, on the floor here. So the burial is not where the bullae were. There were no bullae here. And in fact, what else is in, this is something else I've never really connected with this, but what else is in the room are gifts. Objects that were clearly given to the administrators, and this was where they were stashed. It's like a closet, because there's one big black lace plate from Italy, and there's one big Laganos, a kind of wine jug from the Aegean island of Chios, but just one. There's just so it's like a bunch of wedding gifts that nobody wanted, and they put them. And so there are all these special objects, and those were found in the middle of the room, but they must have been on shelves or something, and then, kind of curled about.
Could the baby be a special object from some place?
I think Danny's got some. Danny?
I want to make something clear. You say that the bullae and the bottles were at the same spot in the room?
The bottles are in the corner, immediately to the right of the doorway, and the bullae were just to their north, but both of these are along the eastern wall of the room.
What I'm asking is this. The bullae were preserved because they were fired, right? On the other hand, just very close to them, there were these bottles which were not burnt. And then we have the mud brick superstructure which burnt and collapsed.
Right.
And we have parts of the room which were not touched by fire, other parts which were burnt fiercely. How did it all work out?
Danny, I wouldn't say that parts of the room were not touched by fire. The only thing that isn't burned are the flasks. They were covered by mud brick that had been burned.
Okay. But yet, if the bullae must have underwent a very strong fire to have been preserved.
Yep.
So could it be that we have a second story or shelves higher up which were burnt and then everything collapsed over the bottles which were on the floor?
I guess it could be. I mean, if they were on shelves, the shelves would have burned. I cannot understand why flasks filled with oil would not show any evidence
That's
of burning.
exactly what I'm getting at. I'm trying to figure out how come the flasks don't even show the slightest sign of burning.
I know, it's a mystery. That's why I think some time went by and the oil, the flasks had fallen, and at least a year or so, enough time went by so that the oil seeped out. That's my current theory. And that completely takes out the Maccabees from the equation, because they leave. They don't hang around. And so my evidence for some other set of actors in the room is the fact that the oil flasks aren't burned. And depending on who the actors are, has everything to do with how we read this burial. But I think we're at 10 o'clock. Are we at 10 o'clock? I mean 11 o'clock.
We are.
So although we could certainly keep on talking, I promised that this would only last an hour. So what I can say is we could continue this conversation at another time, but I'm going to release you all now, and I hope you thought this was successful. It kind of worked at our end. Yeah.
That was fascinating.
Yeah. So just to let you know, Cattell and Paul and Sylvie and David, you probably know that there has been back again in the news some discussion that the tombs of the Maccabees have been found. Yes. So we were thinking, Danny and I, that we would ask Amit Reem, who's the archaeologist who excavates there, to join us for another one of these brown bags in December. What do you think?
Yeah,
Great.
wonderful.
All right. So we'll get involved in getting that set up, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
It was a great pleasure to see you all.
Thank you so much.
And Andrea, if you have anything already published about this building, if you can send it to us by email, it will be wonderful also. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, David. Thanks, Sylvie. Thanks, Paul, Cattell, Danny.
Thank you, Andrea.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
All right, now what do I do? Thank you. Help.
It seems like a good follow-up for this kind of thing might be to have participants send to a discussion board a question that they would like, an unanswered